Thank you so much for tuning into the Woman to Woman podcast, a conversation for women like you, smart, successful, curious, and interested in being your best self. Join both Sarah and I as we discuss topics that women our age are actually interested in, with both of us being candid and often having differing views.
As coaches, we sprinkle in advice and tips, along with humor and vulnerability. We hope you feel like a fly on the wall with two friends. Let's entertain and inform you and welcome you into our friendship.
We appreciate you pressing play and spending some time with us, wherever you are in the world.
Let the magic happen. All right, good morning, everyone. I am so excited with Angela. On this podcast, we are introducing our next guest. And trust me, just probably by the title of this podcast, you already know what it's going to be. But we are inviting today Cam Werley-Gonzales is actually an intuitive living visionary. She's a gifted embodiment expert as well. Ooh, I'm thrilled by this word. And an intuitive unschooling catalyst. What is that? For sure, it's something that you may have not considered or you may have thought about it, but somehow that is a big one, and that's where she's with us. She is the owner of the Cambria Institute, and it's actually a company that celebrates living and learning that is fully out of the box. Oh my God, that's the future. With over 25 years of an expert, as an expert educator, it is Cam's deepest conviction that while learners can engage with some success in typical schools, they are optimally served by alternate learning pathway, most notably intuitive in schooling. The Cambria Institute supports family to embody their intuitive knowing in all areas in their lives. The truth is, we get to learn friend, work, love, parent, hobby, and enjoy all the things that come along with this intense and massively phenomenal life with ease and alignment. This is what Cambria Institute is providing to the world and is preparing our child to step into their full power. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. And I'm so excited. Like when I hear you talk about it, it's just so activating for me because I spent my entire career in a traditional schooling environment. And then when I decided to step out because of all the things that were happening in my personal children's lives and my clients' lives, everything has changed. And so I'm just so excited to be here today and to be talking about this topic because I truly believe it's the future for our children and for globally for our future generations. It's a legacy.
Amazing. Would you like just to start maybe with your story about how did you come out with this concept? Because it's more than an idea, it's revolutionary. So tell us about how you came out with this.
Well, I actually came to it when my own children were in school. So I have 4 children, and I have 3 children who are now adults, and I have a 5-year-old. And so when we had our little lovely, wonderful surprise baby 5 years ago, we were like, oh my gosh, we're starting this whole thing over again. How are we going to do this differently? And we decided that we were going to intuitively unschool from birth for her because our journey with our older children, school was not working for them for various different reasons. And we actually had moved multiple times to get into new schooling environments or school districts. We tried public school, we tried private school, we tried different, religious schools, non-religious schools, secular, all sorts of different things with them, Montessori schools, and they weren't fitting in optimally, right? Like things were okay, they were doing okay. Like if they were doing well academically, they were having social struggles. If they were doing well socially, maybe the academics weren't there. And things just were not working for them. And both my husband and I are educators. So I was a secondary school or high school teacher and administrator. My husband teaches at the college level. And we were like, this is just not working. And when we really thought about it, it didn't really work for us either. But we were just in the system and we just went through it. And so we decided, first there was an incident that happened with our oldest son, and we made a decision overnight. He's not going back tomorrow. Like literally it was that kind of a scenario. Like we were faced with something that had happened and we were like, no, this is just not okay. We're not going back. And it was, the school then later came to us and said, we're so sorry. This is how we're handling it. But I thought, I just don't want my kids to be around this. This is the kind of stuff that happens in their lives that's traumatic that we have to do a lot of healing for as adults, right? And if we think back to it, a lot of trauma comes out of the schooling system. A lot of conditioning around like who we are as people, what makes us successful, where our value is, how our peers understand us. And we were seeing that happen with our kids. And we were like, we don't want this to be their experience of learning and living and friends. And we want to do something different. So we actually pulled our oldest son out and started homeschooling him. And homeschooling is different than unschooling. And unschooling is different than intuitive unschooling. So I can unpack that, a little later. But we started homeschooling him. So we took a traditional curriculum and we just started doing it at home. And we were really bad at it. Like we laughed that we were like these professional educators and we were like the worst homeschoolers ever. We just were horrible. Our kids were like, they hated it. They were like, we don't want to do this. It was ruining our relationship. It was like awful, and we laugh about it because, I have parents that come to me that are like, I would love to unschool, but I just can't do it because I don't want to be the one doing it with my child. And I said, you don't have to. In fact, we figured out that we weren't the ones to do it, that really there were lots of other ways to accomplish it. And, but we were still doing this traditional curriculum, but at home. And then we started realizing that like, this isn't really helping. We've solved some of the issues, but still they're sitting down, they're having to earn a certain grade. The test is, curated by someone or a company or a teacher, but it doesn't necessarily match what they're learning and it's not assessing who, well. So we decided to play around with the concept of unschooling and with our older kids. And eventually all three of our older kids unschooled and then went on to university and the rest is history. But it's really interesting how it all kind of developed, and now we're doing intuitive unschooling from the get-go with our youngest. She will never have a traditional schooling experience in the way that our older kids started with and eventually left. But it's just been amazing.
So when you decided to take your kids out of the traditional school, how did they react? The first time it was hard. I understand that the adjustment was kind of hard, and I totally understand that. But how did you finally get them? How did you manage to have them, on board with that?
Yeah. Well, for my oldest son, because he, at that time, interestingly enough, he was showing to be a shyer personality. What's interesting is that he's no longer that way. And we didn't realize that the conditioning of school had actually manifest that in him. And so we just thought he was shy, right? Because he had been going to school since preschool. And, he just it was showing that way. And at one point we thought he had some social anxiety and, things like that. So he was happy to not go.
Okay.
Our middle child we have four, but at the time we had three. She was like, could go either way. It was our youngest son at the time, or our third child, that he's so Mr. Social. And he was like, no, I don't want to do this. And interestingly, he was the one who we knew really needed it the most, because the way that he was engaging socially was not healthy, right? He was developing some of those like people-pleasing tendencies and things that were just to fit in. And, this is stuff that when I look back at my own and maybe your own schooling lives, I don't know what your schooling histories are, but I look back and like, of course I now see how I developed personally a huge people-pleasing tendency within my own life. And, you know, that went into my career and all sorts of things, and, you know, comes out of my family, but a lot of it was in school. And I started noticing this in our son. So it was funny. He was the one who didn't want to leave. And we were like, he's the one who actually really must leave because this is going to be like important for his development. But it was really hard to get him on board. And so we had to do a lot to get him engaged with peers in other ways. And so he started doing other, you know, activities and things like that. And we worked, actually, we always say we worked harder getting him to all of those activities than we ever did getting him to school, but it was so worth it because of the adult he's become. So it's just, you know, such an interesting kind of process and journey on how it all works. But it is, as a parent, I think it's terrifying to take your kids out of school and go, oh my gosh, are they going to learn what they need to learn? Are they going to get what they need to get? I mean, every parent asks me that. Well, what if they don't get everything? And that's where the intuition comes in. So, and it took us a while. We did homeschooling, and then we did unschooling, but more traditional unschooling. And then now we do intuitive unschooling. It's a totally different trajectory.
So when you say intuitive schooling, right? Intuitive unschooling. Does that involve parents?
Yes, it does involve parents, but it involves parents in trusting their own intuition and trusting that their child's intuition, that their soul path is established from the moment they appear on this earth, and that soul path is meant to not be disrupted by the conditioning of our society. It's meant to actually work through it. And so it takes, at the Cambria Institute, I do a lot of work with parents on undoing their own conditioning so that they can do this with their children, so that their intuition is synergistic with their children's intuition and they work well together in this self-guided education. Because unschooling is self-guided education. And when you take the intuition and you focus on it, and it's intuitively guided education, you can trust that everything you need to learn for your path is going to happen in the right timing, in the perfect way, in the most amazing fashion to equip you, or to equip your child, to equip your family with the ability to live in the way that you're intended to live on this earth for the time that we're here. And it is so powerful to unleash this and unlock this in children, because they're already so naturally connected intuitively, and it's not until they grow older and they start to get conditioned in different ways and experience various different traumas that this starts to kind of fade for them. So to keep it intuitively connected, and then as parents to connect back into who we are intuitively, and to start trusting ourselves as parents and trusting our children, it really, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal to see how perfect all of the things that they learn are. And sometimes you don't see it going forward. It's like, as entrepreneurs, we step out and we're like, I don't know, I'm taking a risk here, but I'm trusting that this is my path forward. And I'm taking that leap, and I'm trusting that that the universe is going to catch me, that, you know, that it's going to be fine. And it is. And that's what we do, but we apply it to learning. And it's always amazing. And, you know, it takes into account everything, like a learning challenge, or, you know, like you were mentioning, Angela, you were talking about things like ADHD, or, you know, things like that. When your child is intuitively connected, all of those things naturally work themselves out. It's not that doesn't exist anymore, or that it's just no longer a problem, because you're not in a problem. And I like to say that in quotes, because it's never a problem from my perspective, but it's no longer something that needs to be accommodated in a classroom or addressed in a classroom, because you're not in that classroom setting. You've provided a setting that works perfectly for your child. And some people need more, some people are intuitively guided. Some children are more intuitively guided to more structure, and some to less. And it just allows it to be absolutely perfect for each child.
So I guess my question is, like, how does it work on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So it really kind of looks different for each family. A lot of families who do this, you want to keep in mind that you don't want to in any way mimic school at home. So this is how we badly homeschooled / unschooled when we first started. Okay, everybody gets up at 7:30 in the morning and we have breakfast and everybody starts learning at 8:45 or 9 o'clock, and you learn until 3, and then you go to your after school activities. That is always the wrong way to do it. But of course, we were thinking as educators, my husband and I, this is what we do. They can do whatever they're intuitively guided to during that time, but it's going to be during that time. And pardon me, what you realize soon is that nobody actually lives that way, right? In reality, we don't actually live that way. That's something that we have forced. So then we started saying, okay, let's intuitively let you figure out, what does this rhythm look like for you? And really what it became down to is learning is living and living is learning. So some days it looked like we were going somewhere together on a trip. And I was working on stuff with, what was happening in my life, and they were working on their things. Sometimes we were at the beach, sometimes we were at coffee shops, sometimes we were at the mall, sometimes we were at home. It looked like what it looked like. And so on the day-to-day basis, it just starts looking like everyday life when there's no school, except that the intention setting in the family is to learn exactly what you need to learn. But this is where the kind of like unpacking of the conditioning, there's no setup of like school on a day-to-day basis in your home. You are literally just living life in whatever that looks like. And so if it's a day where somebody's super tired, then you take that into account. Sorry, I interrupted you, Angela.
Well, no, I was interrupting you, but I did want to ask, if it is so flexible, does that also mean that there is not a distinction between weekdays and weekends?
That's a choice as a family. So in my family, we ended up not having a distinction between them. It was just part of what worked in our flow. But I do work with a lot of families where that they still want to have a distinction between workdays and weekends in terms of the intention that they set. So the weekdays tend to be more self-motivated and self-guided, whereas the weekends are more family time or, depending upon the situation. For me, in the way that it ended up working with my family and a lot of my clients is you can't make the determination ahead of time. You have to see how it flows out in your family life, because it's a total unlocking of like, what does it look like to work and what does it look like to school? And it's a total change in that perspective. And you start really thinking of what would life, like I always encourage people when they first start thinking of this, what would it be like if there was no such thing as school or work? Like, how would you live your days? And most people are like, I have no idea, because it's like, I've always had school and we've always had work. Even as entrepreneurs, we still have this like construct of it, right? So really starting to lean into what would this look like if these things just didn't exist? How would we spend our time? And how is that connected to who I am as a person? And what am I here to do? So I have conversations with my, clients, especially my teenagers, of like, what are you here to do in this world? Like, how do you figure that out? And what are you drawn to? And what's lighting you up? And those are the conversations we're having like every single day, and what they're doing as a result of that.
What do you learn during a day? What do you teach? What the kids are learning, and what do you teach during the day when you're in such a model?
So there is no teaching, like the model of like a teacher and a student. The way that Cambria organizes it practically is around mentorship. So if there is one of the learners that is like, I just really want to learn about aerospace, then we connect them. Either they find the mentor themselves or I find the mentor for them, somebody who can mentor them in aerospace. So whether it's a scientist or a professor or, somebody who works in the professional field who would like to be a mentor for them, and that student mentors with them. And sometimes it looks like going and observing what they're doing in the field. And sometimes it looks like being tutored by them, but it's driven by the student. And so it's never driven by like the expectations of the state or the expectations of the government or the expectations of anything like that. And that's where it's fun because it's not like you have to learn this level of English when you're 14 and this when you're 16, and like it's, or this level of math or this level of whatever, you are learning what is appropriate for you because you're intuitively guided towards it. And it's interesting because as a professional educator, one of the roles I had was doing transcripts for kids so they could get into great colleges. Like that's what I did professionally for over 20 years, and helping them build that. And my unschooling clients have far better resumes to go to college than any of my kids did in traditional school, like far better. Because when you're tapped into who you are, when you're intuitively guided, you are just like, the sky's the limit. Like and the way you use your time is so different. Because when you're going to school for 6 to 8 hours a day and you're using that time to do homework and things like that is being prescribed to you from the outside, and you've got maybe a little bit of time at night, maybe, or on the weekends, to really start thinking about what you're drawn to, like it's a complete waste of time. It's a complete waste of life because you're not actually doing what you're drawn to. And when you start spending the time doing that, I mean, the resumes that these kids have, it's like they're phenomenal. Like you look at them and you're like, how much they've accomplished in their life, but it's true like accomplishment, right? Because it's soul driven and it's powerful and it's deep. And it's just like I look at their transcripts that I put together for them for their universities based on the things they've done in their lives, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like fun, so cool. Like and universities love it because they look at the lives of these kids and they're like, so much life, so much living has happened, and they're such interesting humans because they're living in their soul path. And so universities, if that's the desired path, not everybody wants to go to university who unschools, but if that's their desired path, they end up being amazing candidates. So it's like the use of time, the way the time is used, and tapping into who we are and what we're here on this earth to do from the get-go. It creates a scenario where we have so much on a transcript by the time they're 17 or 18 that you like almost can't even fit it. Like sometimes I laugh, they're like 10 pages long, and I'm like, no university actually wants to look at this, but it's so fun to write it. So we write it anyway, so we can all like celebrate it.
I have a question. I have a question about that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So you're saying you're promoting unschooling, up until 18,
yeah.
and then you're saying they might go to university, which is traditional schooling.
Yeah, if they choose to.
So that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. So that's if it's the desired choice. A lot of unschoolers like university because there's more choice in university than there is. It's less prescribed. There's more choice in terms of what you study. It's still a traditional modality though. So they're still taking classes with tests and things like that. I would say of my unschooling clients, about 50% go to university and 50% do other things. A lot of them do, they go right into industry or they start their own companies. A lot of them are entrepreneurs from the beginning. But others are like, no, I really desire to, like, my soul path is to work in medicine. I have a client that's like so clear to this child who's now a teenager and is like, this is my path. And so even though they've unschooled, what they have chosen to do along the way is take some traditional modalities coursework. But here's the difference. So if you're intuitively unschooling and you're drawn towards taking a biology class or an advanced calculus class or something like that, if you're drawn to it, it's you engaging with the coursework in a way where you are driving the learning and choosing the modality. The professor, the grade have no say over you. They have no energetic say over you. They have no actual say over you because it's not something that you're engaging in it because you desire it and you're led to it, but you're not conditioned by it. You don't have to perform in the way. So it's interesting. Like I have a client who just took a college class and actually didn't pass it, but learned all the material, but just never show up to take the test because they didn't desire to. Like it just didn't match what they desired to do. But they have all the information now, and it didn't matter that they didn't pass it. So it had no say over who they were. I have other students who take it and they're like, I got an A and great, but it didn't mean anything. It didn't become something that made them feel like, oh, if I got a B next time, it would be awful. Or if I got a D, it would be awful. It had no say over that. So it's really about the conditioning aspect and who's driving the learning. When you intuitively unschool, it doesn't mean that you don't engage with the world. You can if you're guided to it. Just like a lot of us who are intuitively connected in our soul path have jobs in traditional companies, but it's the way in which we interact with them.
By choice.
By choice. Yeah. Not because we feel like we have to.
So can I play devil's advocate then? Because I have gone through like almost 2 years of homeschooling, you know, with a kid who wasn't interested. And so that I'm sure many of our listeners would be, and even though I'm, you know, unschooling actually really appeals to me. I have been conditioned, you know, by my 20 years of school. My question is, what if your child is intuitively led to do nothing all day long?
So I think that does happen. So if I find when that happens, you have to run with it. But it only lasts as long as that deconditioning happens. So a lot of the times I have families that are like, my school is not working. I need to pull my child out. I want to unschool, but all they want to do is play video games. All they want to do is watch TV. All they want to do is sit around. And that's because school and learning has been so stressful that all they want to do is run the opposite direction and do things that are relaxing and they enjoy. But truly, once they've gone through that period, we call it deschooling or deconditioning from school. What I recommend to parents during that time is, you know, if they're tending towards video games or tending towards TV, don't start saying no and putting, you know, requirements on like, you can't do that, you can't do this, but do things that are different. Travel together, go places together, start going out to coffee shops together and working during the day, go to the library, do something where you're doing something and not just at home. But you have to allow that child to start to go through the deconditioning process of unhooking themselves from that. Because for kids who are coming out of any sort of schooling scenario that was uncomfortable and unpleasant, learning to them is painful. Learning to them is awful. It's forced, it's prescribed, it's stressful. And so you have to start living in a different way. So a lot of times for my clients, but also with my own children, we didn't do anything that resembled learning at all for a while. We just really started hanging out and doing things and started living together in a way that they could then start leaning into, like, what am I actually interested in? What do I really like? What does it mean to tap into my intuition? So to go back to Sarah's question is, what do I teach? You know, the stuff that I teach at Cambria is how to tap into your intuition. Every single class that I teach is, how do you do that? What are the practical skills? How do you go through self-healing modalities? Like, how do you get yourself to the point where you can actually be tapped in? So the answer to that question is, until you can get your child to the place, and this is where you can get support from a place like Cambria, until you get your child to the point where they're tapped into who they are, it often will be messy. There is a messy middle. Like, it is a process, right? And, you know, you even mentioned, Angela, your undoing of your own conditioning, right? It's like, oh my gosh, how do I do that, right? I don't want to be working in my business and then, you know, my child's just playing video games all day. You know, is that healthy? Is that, you know, all of that? So, you know, really deciding as a family, like, what are you going to do to decondition, to unmatrix, to unhook from the matrix that is schooling?
And so how long, do you have a limit on that? Like, what if it's 5 years and the child still hasn't tapped into their intuition?
The longest that I've...
Yeah.
No, it's a great question. The longest I've ever seen it last is 2 years. And that was a pretty extreme case. And once they tapped in, it was like, it just changed almost immediately for them. But it took them a couple of years. But that scenario was quite traumatic. It was much more serious and severe than the typical family that was choosing to do this. And it did take 2 years, but they didn't play video games for 2 years. They played a lot of video games though. But eventually, because this tapping into your intuition really comes down to worthiness. And when our children have felt unworthy in their learning situations, or even if they felt worthy, but their worth has been on their achievement and not who they are. It really does take time for them to heal from those things. And so that really what you're doing in the deschooling period is the healing and coming into their worthiness and who they are as people. And the thing is that at some point that has to happen in their lives. And oftentimes it happens later in life when there's some sort of crisis. And it's my philosophy that the sooner that we do this, the healthier adults we will have, the more innovative things we will have in our world, because we will be healthy, thriving adults who are doing this, and from a young age.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I have a few questions. Okay. Related to that, how do you get them interested in different topics? How do you expose them to different topics, just for them to know what it is and what they can learn from it, and what's the purpose of these things, like medicine or aerospace, as you mentioned. Any other topic? How do you expose them to those topics?
So have it available. This is where travel can come in. Obviously, we were in a pandemic, and that wasn't possible. But even local travel, going on, I never call them field trips, because if your child has been in school, it's attached to school. So I never use that word. But essentially, field trips, going places, introducing them to interesting people, letting them watch interesting YouTube series, watching documentaries, but never in a forced way. Like, it's just available. With parents who have very young children, like what we do with my 5-year-old is we're actually digital nomads, so we move around a lot, but we have like a whole case of just interesting things, and we just have them in the room, and we let her explore, and we let her pick them up, and then we take her everywhere with us. So she's learning all the time with us, and so when we travel, we take her with us. We go to museums all the time. Like, it's exposure in that way. It's not prescribed or forced. It's exposure. It's like you said, it's just making it available. But the key is to let them choose. If you start to push one over the other, then they start to feel, depending upon your child's personality, oh, mom wants me to do this, or dad wants me to do this, or auntie wants me to do this, or whoever, or grandma wants me to do this, whoever's with them, whatever adult's with them, I'm supposed to do this. And we don't ever want to get to that as little as we can, right? Like, we're human, it's going to happen. But we want it to happen as little as possible. We really want it to be because they're super excited about it. So like my 5-year-old she's the child that's the most like me in terms of my outgoing personality. And she said to me, I want to have a YouTube channel, because of course she sees these young YouTubers. And so we started a YouTube channel for her. We just started it. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't have to teach her how to do anything. She's like, please subscribe and hit this button. And, like she's how kids are, it's like osmosis, right? But she's so drawn to it. And she talks about like some of the stuff that comes out of her mouth in the videos are like so fascinating. Like, she one time did a video talking all about ducks, and I was like, how the heck did you learn about these ducks? And she was like, oh, my older brother told me about them, because she just started asking him questions. And my oldest son is like a bird fanatic. He loves birds. So like, it's so interesting how, like, for her to witness us, this is the first time we've done it from birth with our own child, right? And to see the way that she's developing and growing with such confidence and such freedom to be who she is, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see what this is like at 7, 8, 10. I see it with my clients, but to see it with my own child is like, it's really beautiful. But it's just having it there, exposure, interesting conversations with people. And this is where you as a parent use your intuition. Like, where am I guided to take my child? Like, where am I guided to do this, and where am I pushing too hard, or where do I need to pull back, and how can I, have this conversation if, like, sometimes, I push a little too much, and then, okay, let me step back from this. So you use your own intuition along with, allowing your child's intuition to guide them.
And so what do you do exactly? Like, what does the Cambria, you must have to do a lot of work with the parents, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I have a group specifically of teenagers that I work with. A lot of the teens have had traditional schooling experiences. So I do a lot of the deschooling work and the tapping into your intuition and the healing of trauma and the feeling of worthiness with them. I also do a lot of work with their parents on how to navigate that process with their kids, especially if there's any sort of, anxiety or depression that's kind of manifesting in their kids' lives. How do they navigate that? So I do a lot of one-on-one work with that and group work. With my clients that have younger children, a lot of the work that I do is more like, how do you set up your home? How do you set up your learning spaces? How do you engage with conversation about how to learn? How do you not learn how to not push too much and when to pull back? So it's a slightly different kind of process, but I definitely work with parents most of the time. The kids tend to get it really, really quickly. But the parents, it's us, and my husband and I are a perfect example. Like, we literally live our lives this way now, and this is like the foundation of the company. And yet we were like really bad at it. When we first started, it was like awful. I'm pretty sure that we, traumatized our children when we first started homeschooling. It was pretty awful. And that's the thing, like, it's never too late. Like, this is the thing, it's never too late to start again. And every day or every moment is like, okay, what's next? So.
Did you ever doubt your choice?
Oh, yeah. Oh, all the time, thousands of times, especially with the older kids when we were really starting to like go through the rougher, messy parts of like, are they actually going to learn anything? Because they really needed to decondition and tap into who they are as people. And, now, of course, I look back because they're all adults, thriving adults, like amazingly thriving adults. And I'm like, it was amazing. And so now I have a lot more confidence with my 5-year-old, but I was like, at the time we were like, are we screwing our kids over forever? Like, what are we thinking? Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. And every time you listen, we truly appreciate it. And if you would like to follow me or learn more about my work or get in contact with me, please go to my website, which is angelajanecoaching.com.
And if you want to know more about my work, you can go on sarahmeng.com. All the details are going to be listed in a comment below. You can also follow us on social media, Instagram or Facebook, where we are sharing our daily tips.
Bye.
Hope to see you soon.